Humans had a tradition, a sacred rule, an unbreakable principle of warfare. If the enemy appeared in massive, extravagant warships, wearing bizarre uniforms, and started monologuing, they were to be ridiculed without mercy. Admiral Zyrax of the Zorth Dominion had expected fear. He had expected trembling voices, desperate pleas for diplomacy, and immediate surrender. Instead, he heard laughter echoing across every human broadcast frequency. Is this real? Are we being invaded by a villain from a Saturday morning cartoon? One of their leaders said live on their global network, "Did you guys design your ships after a rejected sci-fi script?" Zyrax's secondary hearts beat rapidly in his chest. He adjusted his stance and signaled to his communications officer to mute the transmission. This was not how it was supposed to go. The Zorth Dominion had conquered 12 systems in the past century, each surrendering within minutes of first contact. Their navy was unmatched, their weapons capable of obliterating entire cities with a single pulse of energy. Their soldiers were genetically engineered for war. The sight of a Zorth dreadnought blotted out the sky, and that was usually enough to make most species submit before a single shot was fired. But humanity was laughing. "Commander Xerox," Zyrax addressed his tactical officer, "perhaps they don't understand the seriousness of their situation. Let's show them." The order was given for a demonstration strike, nothing too catastrophic, just enough to reduce a city to rubble and make a point. The weapons officer locked onto a large metropolis on the northern continent and launched a single kinetic round from orbit. It was a perfect strike, enough to vaporize several city blocks. There was silence for 2 seconds before the human broadcast resumed. "Oh no, not Detroit," someone howled in mock horror. "You saved us the trouble of demolishing it ourselves." Zyrax turned to his officers. "What is Detroit?" he demanded. A lower-ranking Zorth hesitated before answering. "Our intelligence suggests it is one of their population centers, but the reaction does not suggest distress." Indeed, the human response wasn't one of panic. Instead, more laughter followed, accompanied by images of what appeared to be a ruined cityscape before the attack. It was as though their bombardment had made no noticeable impact. Zyrax clenched his mandibles. Fire again. Another target. A capital this time. A pulse of energy tore through the atmosphere, striking a government building with pinpoint accuracy. Once again, there were no screams of horror, no cries of despair. The broadcast continued, and the tone could only be described as unimpressed. "Wow! You really showed that empty government building. That'll teach us." Another voice chimed in. "Can we invoice them for the demolition fees?" That was taxpayer money, you know. Zyrax's claws tapped against the armrest of his command chair. This was unnatural. Conquering a world followed a predictable pattern. Show overwhelming force, establish dominance, and force surrender. But these humans responded with mockery, as if they had seen this before. "Perhaps a more direct approach is needed," Zyrax muttered. "Deploy ground forces. Occupy their centers of power." The order was given, and transport ships descended in synchronized strikes on key locations. Soldiers in gleaming armor, weapons ready, took positions in major cities. They expected resistance, fear, or some form of organized defense. What they encountered, however, was so baffling that several troopers froze in place. Humans in brightly colored clothing stood waiting. Not with weapons, not in military formations, but with cameras. A man in a neon vest approached the nearest squad of Zorth soldiers. "Hey, fellas, you got a permit for this occupation?" he asked. The lead trooper aimed his rifle. "This is a military operation. Stand down or be eliminated." Okay, I hear you," the man said, taking notes on a clipboard. "Just need to fill out some paperwork. Standard procedure. You know how it is. We've got zoning laws now. What's your business here?" "Conquest," the trooper said, still trying to understand what was happening. "Going to need specifics," the man replied, scribbling something down on a piece of paper. "Planetary annexation, military occupation, cultural assimilation. Yeah, all 3. You are not in a position to negotiate, the trooper insisted. Listen, buddy, we've got forms for this, the man said, pulling out a thick stack of paper. Now, you're going to need to file an official request for a hostile takeover. Takes about 6 to 8 weeks for processing. One of the other troopers hesitated. Is this a delaying tactic? I wish, the man replied. Bureaucracy is just like that. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, a squad of Zorth enforcers stormed into a building labeled Federal Reserve. They expected to find the planet's economic heart, the vaults that govern humanity's financial system. Instead, they found nothing but offices and confused clerks. Where is your planetary treasury? Barked the Zorth officer. A man in a cheap suit adjusted his glasses. You mean the gold? Oh, buddy, we've got some bad news for you. We haven't backed our currency with gold in ages. It's all numbers on a screen now. The officer narrowed his eyes. Then what is preventing your economy from collapsing? Confidence, the man answered. And the Zorth didn't know what to do with that response. Back in orbit, Admiral Zyrax watched in frustration as his troops sent report after report of ineffective intimidation. Cities continued their usual business. Workers clocked in for their shifts, and humans casually discussed the invasion as if it were a sporting event. Sir, a communications officer spoke hesitantly. We have an incoming transmission. The human leader wishes to speak. Zyrax straightened. Finally, they were ready to surrender. He signaled for the message to be displayed. A man in a simple suit sat at a desk cluttered with coffee cups, adjusting his tie. Hey there, Zyrax. Listen, we appreciate the whole scary empire routine, but we've got a lot going on right now. Budget season's coming up. The traffic situation is a mess, and frankly, we've had bigger problems than you. You guys aren't even in our top 5 existential threats. Zyrax's mandibles clicked in frustration. Do you not understand the power of the Zorth Dominion? Your civilization is at our mercy. The human sipped his coffee. Cool. So, what's your plan? You stick around, you get taxed. You leave. We go back to our regular nonsense. Your move. Zyrax slammed his clawed hand against his console. This is not how invasions work. The human nodded. Yeah. Welcome to Earth. Zyrax paced across the command deck, his mandibles grinding as he watched the human leader's transmission cut out. The bridge crew remained silent, each officer glued to their stations, avoiding the Admiral's gaze. The invasion was not going according to plan. No, it wasn't an invasion at all. It was a joke, and the Zorth Dominion was a punchline. Commander Rel, Zyrax growled, his eyes narrowing at his second-in-command. Do we have any reports of resistance? The commander hesitated before replying. Minimal. A few of our patrols have reported civilians throwing objects at them. The Zorth Dominion had a long-standing tradition in warfare. If the enemy arrived in oversized warships, wearing ridiculous uniforms and monologue like villains from a Saturday morning cartoon, they were to be mocked mercilessly. Admiral Zyrax had expected fear. He expected trembling voices, desperate pleas for diplomacy, and immediate surrender. What he got instead was laughter. Across every human broadcast frequency, the sound of chuckles echoed. One of their leaders, on live television, asked, "Is this real? Are we really being invaded by a Saturday morning cartoon villain?" Another voice chimed in. "Did you guys model your ships after a rejected sci-fi script?" Zyrax's secondary hearts pounded in his chest. He clenched his mandibles in frustration. This was not how this was supposed to go. The Zorth Dominion had conquered 12 systems in the past century. Each surrendered within minutes of first contact. Their navy was unmatched. Their weapons could level entire cities with a single pulse of energy. Their soldiers were genetically engineered for war. But humanity? Humanity was laughing. Commander Xerxes leaned forward. Perhaps they don't understand the gravity of the situation. Show them. He gave the order for a demonstration strike. Nothing catastrophic, just a city reduced to rubble to make a point. The weapons officer locked onto a sprawling metropolis on Earth's northern continent and fired a kinetic round from orbit, vaporizing several city blocks. There was a brief silence. Then, the humans resumed their broadcast. "Oh no, not Detroit," one of them shouted, pretending to be horrified. "You've saved us the trouble of demolishing it ourselves." Zyrax turned toward his officers. "What is Detroit?" he demanded. A lower-ranking Zorth hesitated. "It's one of their population centers, sir, but the reaction doesn't indicate distress." Indeed, the human response wasn't panic. It was mockery. Laughter followed, paired with images of a ruined city, as if to suggest that the destruction had made no impact. Zyrax's claws gripped his chair's armrest. Something was wrong. This wasn't supposed to happen. "Fire again," he ordered, his voice tight with frustration. A capital this time. A pulse of energy sliced through the sky, striking a government center with surgical precision. Again, no screams of horror, no cries of despair. Instead, the broadcast continued, completely unimpressed. "Wow! You really showed that empty government building. That'll teach us," a voice quipped. "Can we invoice them for the demolition fees? That was taxpayer money, you know." Zyrax ground his mandibles in agitation. This wasn't how it was supposed to work. Conquer, establish dominance, force surrender. But these humans, they responded with ridicule, as though they had seen this sort of thing before. "Perhaps a more direct approach is required," Zyrax muttered. "Deploy ground forces. Occupy their centers of power." His command was given. Transport ships descended, soldiers in gleaming armor, stepping onto Earth's surface. But instead of resistance, they found something so baffling, so alien to Zorth's sensibilities, that several troopers froze. Humans stood in brightly colored clothing, not with weapons, not in military formations, but with cameras. A man in a neon vest approached the nearest squad. "Hey, fellas, got a permit for this occupation." The lead trooper aimed his rifle, confused. "This is a military operation. Stand down or be eliminated." The man took out a clipboard. Okay, I hear you. Just need to fill out some paperwork. Standard procedure, you know? We got zoning laws now. What's your business here?" "Conquest," the trooper said, still trying to process what was happening. "Going to need specifics," the man replied, scribbling something down. "Planetary annexation, military occupation, cultural assimilation, all three." The trooper, bewildered, glanced around. "You are not in a position to negotiate." The man sighed. "Listen, buddy, we've got forms for this. You'll need to fill out a request for a hostile takeover. Takes about 6 to 8 weeks for processing." One of the other troopers hesitated. "Is this a delaying tactic?" The human shook his head. "I wish. Bureaucracy's like that." Elsewhere, a squad of Zorth enforcers stormed into a building labeled Federal Reserve. They expected to find Earth's financial heart, the vaults controlling the planet's economy. Instead, they found nothing but office workers and confused clerks. "Where is your planetary treasury?" barked the Zorth officer. A man in a cheap suit adjusted his glasses. "You mean the gold?" "Oh, buddy, we've got bad news. We haven't backed our currency with gold in ages. It's all just numbers on a screen now." The officer narrowed his eyes. "Then what's stopping your economy from collapsing?" "Confidence," the human replied nonchalantly. The Zorth didn't know how to respond. Back in orbit, Zyrax paced across the command deck, his claws clicking against the floor. His fleet remained in position. Soldiers had established multiple footholds, yet humanity continued to treat the occupation like an inconvenience, like an interruption in their daily lives. "Sir, we've intercepted an incoming transmission. The human leader wants to speak," an officer reported. Zyrax straightened. Finally, they were ready to surrender. He signaled for the message to be displayed. A man in a simple suit sat behind a cluttered desk, adjusting his tie. "Hey there, Zyrax. Listen, We appreciate the whole scary empire routine, but we've got a lot going on right now. Budget season's coming up, the traffic situation's a mess, and frankly, you guys aren't even in our top 5 existential threats. Zyrax's mandibles clicked in frustration. Do you not understand the power of the Zorth Dominion? Your civilization is at our mercy. The human smirked unfazed. Cool. So what's your plan? You stick around, we tax you. You leave, we go back to our regular nonsense. Your move. Zyrax slammed his claws against the console. This is not how invasions work. The human took a sip of coffee. Yeah, welcome to Earth. Zyrax's mind raced. Nothing was going according to plan. Humanity wasn't scared. They weren't begging for mercy. They were laughing. Do we have any reports of resistance? Zyrax growled, turning to his second-in-command. Minimal, sir. Some patrols report civilians throwing objects at them. Objects? Zyrax's voice rose in disbelief. Yes, sir. Mostly food. One squad was struck repeatedly by what appears to be spherical fried meat. Another reported injuries from high-speed cylindrical bread-based projectiles. Zyrax exhaled sharply, feeling the weight of the absurdity. They're hitting us with food? Yes, sir. Zyrax clenched his claws. This wasn't a battle. It was a comedy show. We need to escalate, Zyrax muttered. Strike their military installations. Precision strikes were ordered. Zorth cannons fired, unleashing controlled destruction on Earth's defenses. The reports came in. Military bases hit. Fortifications obliterated. Weapon silos reduced to craters. And then came the human response. Well, folks, looks like our uninvited guests have decided to throw a tantrum, a human news anchor said, shaking his head with amusement. Military installations have been hit, but honestly, most of them were outdated. The damage is actually kind of helpful. The broadcast cut to a military official, a man with a thick mustache and crossed arms. Yeah, those bases? We've been trying to decommission them for years. Red tape kept getting in the way. Now that they're gone, maybe Congress will approve the budget for replacements. Zyrax's mandibles clicked in fury. We've miscalculated their response, he growled. What do we do now? Rel asked, his voice tinged with concern. We take their leaders hostage, Zyrax hissed. Force their hand. An elite strike team was dispatched to capture a high-ranking political figure. The operation went smoothly, and soon the human captive, a well-dressed older man, was brought before Zyrax. Let's get this over with, the man said, adjusting his cufflinks. I've got a meeting in an hour. Zyrax loomed over him. You are in no position to dictate your schedule. The man shrugged. You think this is the first time I've been in a high-stakes negotiation? Zyrax's patience snapped. You will instruct your government to surrender, or there will be consequences. The human smirked. Here's my advice. If you're going to run an occupation, you'd better have a plan for handling bureaucracy. Otherwise, you're going to drown in logistical nightmares. Zyrax's fists clenched. I did not bring you here for political advice. Then you kidnapped the wrong guy, the human said, leaning back in his chair. Zyrax exhaled in frustration. Turning to Rel, how do we proceed? Rel hesitated. Sir, I don't think this is working. Zyrax let out a low growl. We need to escalate further. Minutes later, another transmission arrived. This one even stranger than the last. A human was on a brightly colored stage, grinning at a live audience. Ladies and gentlemen, our invaders have decided to stick around. Let's give them a big round of applause, he said, gesturing dramatically. Now, I gotta ask, Zyrax, buddy, do you even want this planet? Because honestly, we don't always want it ourselves. Zyrax stared at the broadcast, incredulous. What is the purpose of this? Rel looked unsure. Their species appears to use humor as a means of communication. We do not fully understand its function. Zyrax's claws dug into his armrest. Then let's make them understand. Force them to see the gravity of their situation. But the humans had another response in mind. a music festival, featuring a hit song titled Welcome to the Occupation, complete with fireworks and street parties beneath the hovering warships. Zyrax paced across the bridge, mandibles clicking. They have no regard for authority, no respect for power. This is madness. Sir, Rel said, pale, our troops are struggling. The occupation is falling apart. Zyrax turned to him. Explain. Our soldiers are caught up in customer service complaints. They're being forced to attend tax seminars, fill out permits, and deal with zoning issues. They're tangled up in bureaucracy, Rel said, his voice grim. Zyrax was seething. What's next? We're taking what we need. No more negotiations. But when Zorth soldiers raided a human warehouse, they were met with more paperwork. The human in charge of the warehouse simply nodded and said, "That'll be 6 forms per unit seized. You will need a requisition permit for goods transported outside planetary jurisdiction. Oh, and if you're keeping the goods, you're on the hook for import tariffs." The Zorth officer blinked. "We're conquering you." The human shrugged. "That doesn't exempt you from taxation." Zyrax slumped into his chair. It wasn't resistance that was tearing their invasion apart. It was the logistics, the endless forms, the red tape, the laws that Earthlings seemed to wield like a weapon more powerful than any fleet. The Zorth Dominion had already lost. And so, for the first time in history, a Zorth invasion was called off, not due to military defeat, but because the occupation was simply too much to handle. As the last of the Zorth warships retreated from Earth orbit, humanity sent one final message. A broadcast, once again featuring the grinning host. "Well, folks, that's the end of the invasion. We'd like to thank our visitors for their time. But if they ever want to try again, they'd better bring lawyers next time." Laughter erupted in the background as the broadcast ended with a banner reading, "Better luck next war." Zyrax sat motionless in his command chair, eyes locked on the screen. The bridge was silent. Rel, finally breaking the quiet, asked, "What now, sir?" Zyrax exhaled slowly. "Never speak of this again.